Love God, love people, love people, love people. It's the AC Podcast. For the love of God, love people.
Hey friends, Wes Huff here. We're going to get to the podcast in just a minute, but I want to let you know about our end of year giving campaign. We couldn't do this work without you. Apologetics Canada Ministries continues to share our wonderful hope in Jesus Christ and to equip Christians to do the same. Thank you for your partnering with us in the gospel through prayer and financial partnership as we continue to love God and love people. We are doing an end of year giving campaign, and we have currently a financial partner who is willing to match every fund up to $30,000. So we are so encouraged by all of you who already give and partner with us. And we want to encourage others to join, come alongside with us in order to grow this gospel ministry, to equip people to have an intellectually robust, biblically grounded, and culturally engaged faith. Go to apologeticscanada.com/donate to find out more.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the AC Podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Steve Kim. I'm the Alberta Director for Apologetics Canada. And today I have two very special guests that I've actually had the pleasure of meeting in person over the last few weeks. For those of you who are perhaps not familiar with Apologetics Canada, we do have a pool of adjunct speakers. So people who will kind of run alongside us as we work for the kingdom of God together. And we have adjunct speakers who represent various places across Canada and some in the US and even in the UK. The two guests that I have on today are the two adjunct speakers in the beautiful province of Quebec. I have on the line, all the way from Montreal, or the area there, Samuel Plante and Jean-Sébastien Morin. Welcome to the AC Podcast.
Steve. Thank you. Hello, everybody.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I only just recently had the pleasure of actually meeting you both in person, although on separate occasions. Jean-Seb, I met you at the Ontario conference, and Samuel, you came along to the Evangelical Theological Society trip, and it was just so good to connect with you in person. I'm just going to jump right into the set of questions that I have, because I think this will be a really interesting way to get to know not just you two, but the province, your home province that has shaped you and the work of God that is going on there. I know a lot of our listeners are joining us from the United States and elsewhere who perhaps may not be very familiar with Quebec. So I think it'll be a good episode today. So first off, let me turn to you, Jean-Seb. Tell me a little bit about your history, how you came to faith, and what possessed you to do Christian ministry in Quebec.
So my biological dad left us before I was born, so I was without a dad, and my mother married a non-practicing Baptist. So it's kind of weird because normally they're practicing. That's the difference between Catholics in Quebec and the evangelicals. And so he brought me to faith. And when I was 15 years old, I got baptized, and I really loved Jesus. I had struggled in school in terms of, because I was one of the few Protestant. And so I remember going back home just crying because people made fun of me and talked about me at school because I was a Christian. But then when I was 15, 16, my great-grandmother died. And they asked me to come to her funeral and read some portion of scriptures. And so I said to my great aunt, what am I going to read? And she said, I don't know. You'll see tomorrow. And I remember praying in my room that night that whatever I would be reading, that would touch people's heart. And then I'm in this huge Catholic church. I'm getting to the podium. I open the Bible. I'm 16 and I begin talking. It doesn't happen very often, but I really felt a strange presence. I think it was the Holy Spirit. And I talked with such assurance when I was just reading scripture that my grandfather just kind of looked up and he said a bad word, and then, my grandson's going to be a pastor.
Wow.
Never thought about that. I wanted to go in computer engineering or being a lawyer. But then God opened all the doors. And then here I am now today, 25 years later, still preaching the gospel and seeing as one of my main goals, how do you reach Quebecois with the gospel so they can have a transformed life?
And what is the ministry that you're a part of? What is it called?
Yeah, now it's called One Hope Canada. It was before it was Canadian Sunday School Mission. So we're a mission that are going on 100 years in a few years, and we have at heart we have 42 camps throughout Canada, a few in Quebec. But in Quebec we try to create material in French for discipleship for teenager, preteens, young adults, because there's not much in terms of material for discipleship. So that's and especially in apologetics. So we basically do a little what AC is doing in the rest of Canada, but in French, in la belle province, in the mother tongue that we have.
Okay, great. Let me turn to you now, Samuel, or do you go by Sam? Well, what do you prefer?
Everybody calls me Sam, except my mom.
Okay, call it a motherly prerogative. What about you? What's your story?
Yeah, I was born in the middle of a huge family of 5 kids, and I'm right in the middle. My parents were living in a rural area. They came to Christ when my oldest sister was really, really young. It was through a Billy Graham tour in Quebec. So I grew up in faith, but at my teenager years, I completely left my parents' faith to embrace all the lies of the world, but also all the appetites of my own inner self. I wanted it just to be like everybody, to respect, the codes here in Quebec, the manners, the way they do it. But the more I was giving myself permission to let go and be myself, the more I was kind of slave of my own violences and disorders. So I became like really frustrated against religion, restless, unruly, and very like the bad, we would say in French, like the bad sheep of the house, the one that is not listening, and really the maker at school and at home. But fast enough, I realized that at school I was receiving an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and it was really like justice. But at home, I would be forgiven and be loved. So my testimony is really, I was trapped in the love and grace of God through my family love for me. The years from 11 to 16 were really hard years, but I could see like that the Christian faith for my folks was not just a theoretical idea. It was really something that empowered them to love very deeply. And that's how I met Christ, through the love, especially of my mom. At 16 years old, okay. I realized I was the biggest sinner on earth, but Christ loved me and died for me on the cross. And this was a huge turning point for me. My family could not like understand it. My brothers and sisters were like, is he planning something else? So he wants to be kind for some days and then he's gonna jump on us. But no, the Lord had changed me, my heart, my wills, and I was just a new person. And since then, I'm serving the Lord. Since I'm 17 years old, I just went into a Bible school, institution, and that's about it. Yep.
Wow. It's so cool to hear your testimony, especially when there's a kind of not so much a cultural barrier per se, but you are in a different cultural context than I am. And just to see that the Lord is working regardless of culture, regardless of language, He's doing the same work through His Spirit all across the board. That's really cool. Now, Sam, you're pretty active on YouTube. Tell us about that.
Yeah, 8 years ago, after my Bible study, I became a youth pastor at my church, and I was a youth pastor for 6 years and a half, and I really enjoyed the time with the kids and see the teenagers growing in their faith. But 8 years ago, we felt it was time to pass on this leadership, and we received an opportunity just to build a studio and to preach the gospel online in French, of course. two Quebecers, and we started Sam Parle, Sam Talks. In French, it's a wordplay between like, yeah, I'm talking, but the main goal is that it touches your heart. So we started this ministry where I would preach the gospel in an unusual manner with a lot of humor, but also a lot of editing, and it really like touches like the Quebec cultural air here. I'm using a lot of cultural apologetics. I did a whole series on the swear word in Quebec, because in Quebec, when people are frustrated, they use Catholic words. Yeah, since they have a bad past with Roman Catholicism, they use this word to speak in a bad manner. So I did videos about all these words and recuperate, and also like put the real meaning of these word in the Bible. So this kind of the thing I would do with the ministry. And yeah, a lot of proclaiming the gospel, but also defending the gospel, apologetics. Because I would see that there was a lot of good, like Anglophone ministry, a lot of good French, European ministry, but not a lot of evangelism that is like from Quebecers to Quebecers.
Okay. No, that actually sets me up really beautifully, because like I mentioned earlier, a lot of our listeners are from outside of Canada, and they may not be very familiar with Quebec, maybe other than the fact that you speak French. So let's say that, you meet somebody who's not very familiar with Quebec and you want to introduce them to Quebec. If you had like a 30-second elevator pitch for Quebec, how would you do that?
I'd say we're fun. We're different. We love food, Sugar Shack. We kind of kiss each other and hugs each other when we meet. So that makes English people very uneasy when they're not sure how to greet us. We're maybe 20 years in the future of what it will be for secularization for the rest of North America. Let's do on some aspect.
Quebec is like a huge village with a lot of paradox in it. So I say village because we're almost 9 million, but we act like we are a small nation, and we kind of see the same dynamics you would see in a small town, but we see them like widespread in Quebec. We are really like welcoming, as Jean-Sébastien was saying, but in the same way, we're not that hospitable, I would say. We are, in a sense, victim of our past, but also really strong defender of our identity, our language, our heritage, our values. We are not. We are influenced by the United States, but also by French thoughts. So a lot of paradox in the Quebec mind, in the Quebec heart also. But you bring one person to the Habs game, and he sees in one night who are the Quebecers. He sees the religious heart that was just transformed from Catholicism to Habs.
Yeah. So, and for those of you who may not be familiar with that term, Habs, what he's referring to is the hockey team from Montreal, right? Montreal Canadiens. So there's one thread that ties all of us across, from West Coast to East Coast in Canada is we love hockey. It doesn't matter where you're from, we love hockey. Now, since you brought up this idea of, the Quebecois, you are very strong defenders of your identity, and that can sometimes within Canada can kind of cause some tension. Something that I've been really wondering about is when I talk to my Quebecois friends, I don't have a lot, but my mother happens to live right around the Montreal area, and so I've gone to visit a couple of times and made some friends. And when I talk to them, they say a couple of different things. Sometimes they'll refer to Quebec and Canada, and other times it'll be Quebec and the rest of Canada. Do you guys want to just kind of hash that out for our listeners? Why is this happening?
Yeah, I was listening today to the Parliament, and the Bloc Québécois was not happy with something with the Liberals, and it was interesting because all the time the Bloc person, the spokesperson, was saying, "Well, in Quebec, well, in Quebec." Well, in Quebec, and the rest of Canada sometimes. So when it's and Canada, it's because we agree. And when we say it's the rest of Canada, it's because we don't agree with that thing. I would say that in Quebec, we would identify as Québécois much more than we would identify as Canadian. Even if we don't believe if we're separatists or not, even federalists in Quebec would define themselves as a Québécois first, because we are a really distinct nation. We're the only speaking, well, we love to think we're the only speaking people in Canada, but we are the only province that is their unique language that is actually French.
There's probably like a minority easy reflex that is going on here. Like when you grow up as a Quebecer, you understand like very quickly that your identity is not so much in what you are, but in what you're not. So you're not an English-speaking Canadian. You're not from Ontario or the West. You're not an American. You're not French, even if you are French descent. So this is what you are not. And in some way, because we are a minority, I think the temptation to build huge fences is really there. I think Jean-Seb is right. At many points, people identify here more as a nation inside a huge country than one province inside of the country. Yeah. And of course, it has a lot of bad in it, because sometimes it can become this independent feeling can become really a arrogant feeling, or even mistrust. Even if I don't think it's rebellion or malice in itself. It's just that you think you're isolated, and sometimes when you're isolated, you think that you're the best part of Canada. You're the best province,
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting. Between you two and myself, we represent probably two of the most sort of independent regions of Canada, right? Like Alberta, especially recently, there has been a lot of kind of feeling of, we are our own sort of region, and there has been a lot of kind of separatist kind of sentiment that is kind of rising here as well. And often, interestingly enough, when we do that, we talk about Quebec and look at what Quebec's doing. They're kind of, they're really, protecting their identity and their turf and their culture. And, we should do the same thing. If they can do that, we can do that too, kind of a thing. And I know that especially the province of Alberta and Quebec, we don't always get along on the sort of the government and political level. But it's interesting you say that a lot of Quebecois, they identify as Quebecois first before Canada. And I think that goes to say something about you actually have to, at some point, prioritize your identity, right? And so, as for me, I look at you and I go, before I am Canadian, before I am Albertan, before I am ethnically Korean, I am a Christian first and foremost. And who I'm looking at are my brothers, right? Whether you're from Quebec or somewhere else matters not as much, although I recognize that your culture is a very important part of who you are, and I want to respect that. But
I think I remember in the 90s, before the second referendum, that when we decided if we wanted to be still part of Canada or not,
yeah, I remember
we went
that
with a bunch of guys to a Promise Keepers conference in Hamilton, Ontario. And so we go all the way 7 hours to go there, and we go to the conference. And at the end of the conference, everybody's beginning to sing "Oh Canada." And the Quebecois, we really do believe, even as Christians, with the separation of state and church. And then all our guys are like, the only thing they remember from the conference is not all the conference about men. It's that they make us sing "Oh Canada" there. And what does it have to do with our faith? Because we kind of really separate. Even we would have a hard time saying thank you to God for our country, so to speak, because we believe in that separation. And so it's, and Americans are maybe I remember going about the same time to Orlando to the Holy Land experience. It was a kind of a Disney World with Jesus in it. And I remember being in the temple. It was the week of Independence Day. There was going to be a show in the temple, and there was American flags everywhere. And so for me as Quebecois, I was like, wow, why are those all flags in the temple? so it just helps to see how we may be on the same continent, but we really have a different relationship through how the state and religion fit together. And I think we do, and I think we're wrong as Québécois very often. The rest of Canada sometimes, especially recently with some of the laws we're trying to pass, says that the Québécois are racist and xenophobic. And I believe we are in some aspect of that. And I think that we cover much injustices that we do to minorities under the cover of but we're a minority and we're nationalists, and so I think we have to struggle with those ideas, because yes, I do believe that at this point we're wrong as a province on many different things.
I'm really thankful that we are Quebec and the rest of Canada still one country. And I will say why, because I think in the last 10 years, it was the spiritual protection for all the laws and the project of laws that were about to be voted. And many times the Western provinces would say their word, and it would restrain us to go deeper and faster in the secularization process. So yeah, our brotherhood in Christ is really deeper, but we are proud also of this as a Quebecer, Christian Quebecers.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. Now, you brought up secularization and some of the bills that are being discussed right now in the government. We'll come to that in just a moment, but one of the things that I wanted to cover before we go into that is the quiet revolution. Sometimes I hear that brought up when we're talking about the Quebecois culture. Tell our listeners a little bit more about that. Initiate them into this part of the history of Quebec a little bit.
Well, it's hard to imagine, but Quebec was the place where Catholicism was the most arch and we most oppressed and dominant part of that religion. It was dominating everything, politics, society. There was a priest that would actually come to your house and say, hey, well, it's time to have another kid. And so we had those huge families, and the Pope needed to intervene in Quebec to say that our kids should go to school because the priest didn't want us to. And I was, my wife is an American, and her parents, her mom went to university when she was young. In Quebec, we needed to wait to the 70s to begin to having the first woman go to superior education. So we really were in a kind of a time of darkness, so to speak, where the religion was there to keep us in the dark, and where reading the Bible was forbidden. And one of the reasons is, if you read the Bible, you're going to see that there's a lot of different things compared to what the church is teaching at that moment. So in the Quiet Revolution is that in France, you had the revolution where they cut the head of the king, and there was a huge bloody revolution. And here we're very peaceful. So we did kind of a 500 years transition in about 20 years. And then the church just gently gave to the new government everything, because the church was doing healthcare, she was doing education, it was doing a lot of things. And then we just shift that to the government, so a secular government. And one by one, throughout the years, the school system and the education system and politics and everything went more secularized. And so that was done in the period of 20 to 30 years. And in that period, the Quebecois people left the Catholic Church, but searched for something else. So there was a evangelical revival in the 60s and 70s. And most of the churches that we have, evangelical churches in Quebec, came from that area when there was that shift in the Quiet Revolution.
Yeah. Sam, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would say the church was really omnipresent. It was everywhere. And one of my teachers would use this, I think, really helpful image, saying that the church was like a glove in the winter that is too tight for your hands, so it doesn't allow the blood to circulate. So it was still a glove in the winter. And you know that you need glove in Canada in the winter. Yeah. It was taking care of families. It was the church was the first to start the labor union. It was running the hospital with almost no money. They were educating. They had strong beliefs that we need to take care of the poor, and everything. All of this was based on biblical values and Christian worldview, but the glove was too tight. So at some point, the Quebecers took out the gloves and they shut the door of the church. And maybe if I was there in 1960, maybe I would have done maybe the same thing, because it was more oppressive than the biblical religion, you know. But the funny thing is that the Quebecer people stayed like really embedded. I don't know if I can say this word, and sorry for my English, but they are still like really acting like religious people, and they have this infrastructure of religious thinking. So all the faith they had in the church, now they have it in the state. They call in fact, we call it the state providence. The state took so much place in Quebec. Yeah, so much place in Quebec that people now have hope more in the state of Quebec, the government and the laws, but they are still in this looking for like a father above their head. You know?
Yeah. I sometimes hear the phrase of the almighty state that is providing for your every need. And in a lot of ways, I'm not saying that, you know, Quebec is communist or anything like that, but you see the most extreme expression of that in communist countries like the Soviet Union or North Korea, or, you know, those kinds of things. And so, yeah, that's very interesting to me. Again, I'm not I'm not at all saying Quebec is communist. I'm not going there.
Well, it's not that far off. I mean, even our most right parties are mostly way lefter than American would be on their left spectrum.
Yeah, but there is that kind of, the baseline is different, I find, in Quebec than in, say, Alberta, or even in, you know, say, Nova Scotia even. Anyway, now, given that background, I would assume that your work as Christian ministers would look a little bit different than perhaps if you were to come and serve in British Columbia or Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. So tell us a little bit about that. How does this history, this culture, shape what it is that you do and how you interact with Christians on the ground, or people who don't know Jesus yet or think they know?
You must know who you have in front of you. Let's say for older generations, their assumptions are really different than the Gen Z or Gen Alpha even. The Quebec culture was born out of the rejection of Christ and the church. So they still have in their vein a lot of objections concerning everything that is too institutionalized and too that have too much power. They are looking a lot for autonomy and an autonomous mind that can think by themselves and no need of the church. So with this generation, honestly, like, you need to listen to them, and they will share sometimes the open wounds that they have inside of them, what happened to their mother or their father, and they will share their story. And you can, for myself, I'm just trying to have a compassionate heart and listen to them and show them like the truth of the gospel, how Jesus was the first to reject this ultra religiosity among the Pharisees, and I think this approach was really helpful for me on the field. But with the younger generation, what we see is more a curiosity. They are like white. They don't know nothing like about the church or about Jesus, so they're really curious. They want to know. They ask questions. They sometimes have small objection, but they are really like easily dismantled because it's only objection that they heard like in a Christmas party, and it's not really like they own the objection concerning faith. So in this context, I can see that there's really like an opening for Generation Z and Alpha to answer their question and give them material that is helpful to suscitate their own faith, you know.
Very interesting.
I would say that most people think we're still a cult somehow because they don't know much about us. We have no Christian heritage. So we're still most first generation Christian or second generation Christians now. And so that means that we have no culture of giving or generosity. For us, giving, when the plate was coming in the Catholic Church, is you put a few loonies in, it makes some sounds, you're happy. But then, so most of our churches, and that's something that I find difficult to believe, but we still have much of our churches have some funding coming from the States or the rest of Canada because they believe that what we can do in Quebec. But we are not a poor country. We're not a poor province. And in some ways, we just didn't learn about what the Bible is saying about giving and about being a generous people. We are a very generous people with our open doors. Everybody can come to our places and we'll eat together. But the idea of giving to church or giving to the cause of Christ, it's still something to be learned in those Christian babies, so to speak, as far of we don't have the giants of the past to look at.
Yeah, that's very interesting. A lot of this is new to me too, because I've only really been in a small part of the whole province, and I've only been there for a little while at a time. Now, in the English-speaking world, we talk about the sort of maybe not the quiet revolution, but the quiet revival that is happening, especially among the young people, like Generation Z or Gen Alpha, whoever it might be. Like the Bible sales are increasing rapidly. Church pews are getting filled with young people, especially young men. Now, are you seeing anything similar to that where you're ministering?
I would say yes, but not at the same level that we can see it maybe in the rest of the Canada or in United States or United Kingdom. From my experience in the pandemic situation, I saw that the heart were a bit softened, and there was suddenly like more of a space to talk about religious idea in the public sphere. And because Quebecers, they can smell religious ideas, and they don't want religious ideas in the public sphere, artistic, politics, universities. This is like hardcore secularization, like on steroid. They really like even in the academic sphere. But since the pandemic, for myself, I saw like a shift where the Christian faith, we could have an article here and there, but now I would say like since 1 year we have an acceleration of this, where we see. I'm going to give you an example. In my own church, in 3 years we baptized 450 people. This never happened in the last 50 years in my own church. We have 5 campuses, so. Yeah, I would say like during the pandemic, I could see a shift. Now I could really like experience it and see conversion and see young men. I'm doing a Bible camp every year in Abitibi, and it's in up north in Quebec. And with my wife, we go there since 4 years, and we go there preach the gospel. The first time I went there, the kids wouldn't listen to me at all. Now, like last year, there was like 10 men who got baptized, and they call now their village the religious village, and they're experiencing like the new life of the Spirit by the grace of God. So definitely, I can see that something is going on, but it's not as wow as maybe in other part of the country or in United States.
Yeah.
I was having breakfast this morning with a regional coordinator, and he was telling me actually that all of our churches in our Baptist fellowship are actually growing at this point. So I think we're seeing a trend of more and more people, especially Gen Z, coming back or coming for the first time. I think one of the questions, though, that I wonder is to see if they will stick. Because you can come to Jesus or have an interest in the faith, but it is a generation that really has drank the Kool-Aid of all the gender theory and everything. And so when they're confronted after with the idea, so God has a plan also for my sexuality. God has a plan for my life. And then when it begins to kind of the rubber meets the road, we'll see in some ways if what is this spiritual interest, but we should capitalize on it. And how can we have more open doors at a time where the government doesn't want us to speak in the public space, but we need to speak in the public space at this moment because there's an interest from the population.
Yeah, let's move on to that. But just before we do that, I just want to pause to appreciate the fact that you used the phrase drinking the Kool-Aid. Is that, do you say the same thing in French, or is there something comparable to that?
No, I think we basically say the same thing. On a bu Kool-Aid.
Okay, drinking the Kool-Aid. Okay, that's very interesting. Before we go on to some of the things that are happening with our governments, now, just to be clear, Apologetics Canada is not a political organization, but we do touch on political topics from a social, ethical, kind of a worldview perspective. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. But before we move on, I just really wanted to know, what are some of the most pressing questions that young Quebecois people are asking today from your perspective and experience?
Well, the church in Quebec is like really young. As Jean-Sébastien said earlier, we went from like 40 small churches to 400, 500 in a blink of an eye in the years 70, 80. So we didn't have a lot of opportunity to communicate clearly our faith to the Quebecers, the gospel, but like with all its ramification. And I would say that we are still at the beginning of the conversation because they hear us, but right away they go, okay, is it the same gang that think that abortion is something that is bad? Is it them that think that homosexual couples are not good enough to be real couple? So we're really at the basic level. I think at some certain points in our apologetics, and it's this kind of objections that we can hear on the medias. So we have a lot of work to do to explain and express like the biblical view in a manner that they understand it.
I think when we converted to Christianity, Quebecois mostly didn't convert because of their sin. They converted from a work righteousness that was in Catholicism. So I was saved from trying to get to heaven on my own efforts. And so when you tell them, hey, God wants to transform you, and there's going to be works of righteousness because they're coming from the Spirit and everything. So they're still having a hard time with that. And so when we're still preaching the gospel in most of our churches today, we've got half the gospel. Jesus died for your sin so you can get to heaven, without saying, well, he's going to give you the Holy Spirit and bring you the image of the Son. And so I would say I agree with Sam. I go in many camps throughout the summers, and the questions just come over and over and over from teenagers. Does God love my gay or transgender friend? At this point, that's one of the most important. There was somebody in our church that went through the baptism class, but still decided not to go to because, well, does that mean that I have to have the same opinion than Jesus on abortion? So those are really still hot topics because they're everywhere in the medias and the government at this point.
And I would add that because of the secularism is really high in Quebec, many people think that faith is something that concerns like the afterlife, or it's only like a belief that can maybe help you in some manner, but they don't understand the change and the impact on the here and there. Like, what can it change? They are really stuck in the mindset, okay, this is like another level. It's a vision of the world, maybe, and I don't have faith for myself, but my parents had it. But I think one of the really useful evangelism, the effectful evangelism I had is just teaching the people like how it changes everything in you, change your family, change your way of doing life. And this is one key point now in Quebec that is really important to emphasize.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some of those questions are, in a sense, directly related to, like, kind of like what you said, Jean-Seb, earlier, that's what they see in the media, right? Issues about homosexuality, transgender, and some of these other issues. So let's turn to the media and the government, what's being talked about there, because right now there is a bill that is being discussed at the House of Commons. And so for our listeners who are from outside of Canada, perhaps you're from the States and you're not very familiar with the Canadian legal system. So House of Commons, just think of it as your Congress, right? This is where we make the laws. So they're discussing this bill. It's called Bill C-9. And the worry around this bill is that it'll severely limit religious freedom. It's going to criminalize certain religious speech and so on. So, Jean-Seb, let me turn to you and ask you, what is going on with Bill C-9? What is this bill? What is this supposed to do? And what are the worries surrounding it? And you mentioned actually there's something very similar going on in your own province as well. So tell our listeners about that. What's going on?
Yeah, the Bill C-9, it's really a trajectory that we've seen for over many years, with the idea that with the Charters of Right, basically we are all protected. All minorities are protected. So you have liberty of religion, you have freedom of speech, but then you cannot say to incite people to violence and saying, let's kill all those kind of people. And that happened in Quebec 2 years ago, where an imam said that basically we should kill all the enemies of the people of Gaza. And he was not charged, but then so it's the Bloc Québécois that has made a deal with the Liberals in saying, we'll help you pass Bill C-9 if you remove that clause that we won't remove from many years now, which is you cannot hide. Example, as a pastor, if somebody wants to get married and then they want a same-sex marriage, and as an evangelical and with what I believe in the Bible, I say it's against my conviction, so no, I won't. So it doesn't mean that I'm going to stone them. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to respect them, but it just means that I will not agree to marry them. So, but if we remove the religious exemption that is in the law at this point, because it says you can use the Bible to say, if my objection comes from my faith and comes from my holy scriptures, then I cannot be charged and I cannot go to prison or I cannot be sued on that question. And so the part they want to remove from the bill, that's the main. So the Bill C-9 is mostly the hate speech act, so to speak. And we're not against virtue. I mean, we do agree it's a Baptist principle of saying we're not going to persecute you and you're not going to persecute us. And so we're going to accept that we have different viewpoints, worldviews. But then now what is redefining also in that bill is what hate speech actually is. Because hate speech is bringing, like those signs, God hate those kind of people and stuff. But then in Canada, and especially in Quebec now, I would say that hate speech is when you say to somebody that you don't agree with them. And especially we added in the Charters of Right that you cannot do discrimination now, not only because of race or sexual, but also sexual orientation or gender orientation. And so basically, in Canada, that's the thing. If I say, well, I cannot say to my kid or to a kid now, you need to stay aligned with your original or biological sex, because that would be somehow a hate speech, because I'm marginalizing in them. And so in this way, hate speech is not only getting violence into it, it's just saying I'm against, because it's exactly, and I do understand it's exactly the same thing as if I would go to a black person and I would say to them, it's bad that you're black. It would be racism. It's not good. But then why should I or could I go to an homosexual, somebody practicing being a transgender, and saying it's not good being? It's like if I'm attacking what they are. And so the Liberals, from their standpoint, says, well, we want to protect everybody. And so let's all agree, and we all agree that it's bad discriminating people. So people of faith should not have any problem with it. Jesus is about love. But then you have parts of the New Testament and Old Testament that says that God has a plan for sexuality, and that sexuality is not something that you are, it's something that you do to one extent. So what we're very afraid of is that we're going to have pastors and people of faith and rabbis and imams getting in prisons just in the fact for believing in their early books. So that's why basically conservatives are trying to fight very, very hard. And I don't know how that's gonna turn out, because today in the House of Commons, the discussion that was there is that the Liberals seems to be listening to religious lobbying, and they decided, well, let's put a stop on it. And the Bloc was very, very not happy with that.
Okay, so let me slow you down just for a second. So for our listeners, again, who may not be familiar with the sort of the political landscape of Canada, right now we have a Liberal government. So the Liberal Party is a federal party that is currently in power. Bloc Québécois are the federal party from Quebec. And they have a very kind of a strong stance on, protecting our identity, protecting, and part of the kind of the historical background that we talked about also explains their stance on secularization. That is what they want. That is their stated goal, is secularization. And so there is a certain kind of influence that's coming from Quebec through Bloc Québécois wanting to secularize all of Canada from coast to coast. And what you're saying is in our Constitution, in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is a part of our Constitution, there is an exemption for religious speech or anything related to religion, and they're trying to remove that. And doing that will make our certain opinions about sexuality and gender, those kinds of things, they would be rendered hate speech, which would be a crime, which is actually handled by the criminal code, which is the highest and the harshest kind of law on citizen behavior. Is that an accurate summary?
Yes, and one other thing they want to remove with Bill C-9 is that you needed to have the equivalent of the Attorney General in the states of the province to say we're going to pursue into that to charge somebody with hate speech. But now that's going to be removed too, so it's easier to actually sue people. And you're right, the Bloc really wants to eliminate religion from coast to coast, and that's what we see in our province with what we call it's the Bill 9. At this point, it's still a project where the idea is, and
so this is Quebec's bill.
Yeah, especially Quebec. And we have another law in Quebec called the Law 21, which is in a case in front of the Supreme Court where the federal government is suing the provincial government for not putting that, not to put that law into effect, which say basically that every officer of the state, whether a teachers, a politicians, a policeman, fireman, cannot wear any religious symbols at all. And that's and now there's more laws in Quebec that want to go that way. And one of those is the Quebec government doesn't want to have any confessional school anymore. And he's saying, and he just said this week, you're going to lose your funding if you talk about Jesus on school hours. And you cannot choose religious students, or you cannot choose your personal because of religion. If not, we're going to lose basically your permit. And it came to the point that there's the other party in Quebec that's going to probably take power if things happen as they look now, which say we're going to ask everybody in the school systems, students too, to remove their veil and their hijab and their crosses and their
any religious symbol
whatsoever. And in a conversation with the journalists, the Minister of Secularization said that they did toy with the idea of saying maybe we should just ban all religious symbols in the public sphere at all. And then so what it brings is there's a lot of Muslim women actually that cannot continue to work because they won't go to work because they don't want to remove. And the government is like, why don't you remove your veil? It's just a veil. And they don't understand that there's a religious view and a worldview that comes with it. And the secularization minister just was asking a question of the journalist, and I think that's out of this world. Somebody asked, "Hey, but can kids still sing Christmas carols in school or Hanukkahs?" And he said, "Well, there's a lot of Christmas carols without Jesus in it, so I guess it's okay. But what about Merry Christmas?" And he said, "Well, if when you wish Merry Christmas at somebody, you think about Santa Claus. Well, that's okay. If you think about the little Jesus, that's not okay." And so we're in a place. So save us, Supreme Court.
Yeah, that's straight up thought control right there. That's so.
And so they basically want religion to be a thing of the past because it's a bad thing.
And more of that, they are moved by an ideal of neutrality. Like the state will finally put the good neutrality and it will work. No more religion. It is driven by the idea that religion is the source of conflict. Religion is not useful anymore. It used to be of the past something we had. We don't need it anymore. So I think that they still believe in these prophets and prophesize that we must get rid of the religion if we want to have a good nation that is fair, that is fruitful. The Quebecers are like vaccinated against religion, and in some way they cannot see even like the good that could come from the religion beliefs and even the other religions that we have here in Quebec. One thing I think is really controversial with the law C-9 is that it removes the definition of hatred from the one that is hating to the one that is hatred. Can I say this? You got it?
Okay, yeah.
So the definition used to be an emotion of an intense and extreme nature that is clearly associated with vilification and detestation. This is the definition of hate speech in the law. But now the new definition is the emotion that involves detestation or vilification and that is stronger than disdain or dislike. So you see that like the bar is
the bar's
lower.
coming down. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a bit blurry. You don't know who could fit in this new category of hate speech. The law is a bit more about the subjective part of the hate speech than on the objective hatred part.
We actually a number of months ago addressed Quebec and the secularization in Quebec and state neutrality, actually. And one of the points that was, I would love to bounce this idea off of you guys, because one of the things that was pointed out, I don't know if that was recorded or if that was a conversation after the recording was done, but the idea was brought up that there are two different kinds of neutrality or two different kinds of secularism. One is this sort of negative secularism in the sense that this is just the state getting out of the way and let the people do what they want, right? So the state is staying neutral with respect to religion and just leaving the citizens to do what they want. If you want to practice Christianity, go ahead. If you want to practice Islam, go ahead. We're just going to take our hands off of it. It's not our jurisdiction. Whereas positive secularism is the kind of secularism where no religion. There is an enforcement of something which makes it positive in that sense. There is something there. Rather than the state getting out of the way, this is state getting in the way and enforcing. And so in that sense, what is this neutrality that we're talking about, right? It is the letter. It is the state, in a sense, imposing its own ideas about what life should look like, and you are going to follow our ideas. And so that's why I think they can say, well, it's just a piece of clothing. Take the hijab off, as if it's nothing. And so, like, does that make sense to you guys? Is that a fair way of saying it, you think?
Yeah, totally. I think if your secularism ideology have no religious boundary, it becomes a god, and it wants more power. It wants more authority on the people. For myself, I think that secularism is just it can be a good fruit of Christianity, separation of the church and the state, and a clear mandate for the magistrate, for the government to go for the common good, to penalize bad and to encourage good in the society, and in some way, like bringing upfront like the equality of everybody, the dignity of the human being. But when the secularity has an atheist agenda and as itself assumption that we need to get rid of religion, this is where we just go on the other part of the fence, and it starts to be negative. We want to take back rights of the people instead of giving them liberty. The funny thing, in Quebec is that the Protestants, since 200 years, they are the one who's saying maybe the states should be neutral. Protestants could not have education. They could not work. They couldn't have a church here in Quebec because of the Roman Catholicism regime, if I can say this. And now the laws that we voted and we encourage are now turning against us because of the negative secularism. Sorry.
Yeah, the state should be agnostic, so to speak, of what I don't know if the ones that wants to rent that room is Christian or Muslim or just scouts or Christian scouts. So scouts are good, Christian scouts no, but they're retro Satanists. So they should be agnostic. So and that's the thing. You're right, Steve. It's if they are pushing the atheist agenda, then it is an ideology in itself, but they don't realize it.
That's very interesting. What are some concerns that are you hearing any concerns from pastors and other ministers that around you about Bill C-9 and also the Quebec Bill 9? Is there anything that you're hearing in particular on the ground?
Yeah, prison and the idea of not being able to have church anymore. Because tomorrow they're not going to change that with the provincial one. They're not going to change the taxation at this point, but they say that there's more things they want to do at this point, but it's going to come. And because it's in the report that was given, ordered by the government, it's one of the recommendations that we stop giving tax exemption because that would be some kind of subvention that the state gives to the church. But in reality, Sam is in one of the biggest churches in Quebec, but most of the churches in Quebec are 100 members and less. And so they often have the chance between paying their church or paying their pastor. And normally the staff of most churches in Quebec are one. And so at this point, if tomorrow morning we need to pay the taxation at the level of commercial or things like that, most of the churches in Quebec will have a big problem. And even Nouvelle Vie or Le Portail, some of those big churches with huge building, I cannot imagine just the taxation that's going to be on it. So tomorrow morning, they decide to remove those tax exemption. And I think most of our churches will struggle. I think the church, when is getting persecuted, it's changing, and that's good. But I think that's going to be a challenge for many churches that won't want to actually evolve or try a different model of how to be the church.
Yeah, and even like if we would have all the reason to fear, and all the pastors have really serious concerns, as Jean-Seb just said, and it's really normal that they have huge concern. What I saw in the last 3 months since the bill PL9 was put up front and all the recommendations is huge unity among the leaders of Christian churches and a huge movement. We had this young movement called Québec libre de croire, Quebec free of faith, free of belief, and it had a huge impact because out of the 50 recommendations in this report that was ordered by the government, only 4 or 5 were applied, in fact. So I would say, I think it's one of the first time in history that evangelicals have had a good voice and put their concern up front and did some peaceful protests to the government. So it's the beginning of a evangelical subjectivity here in Quebec, and it's really nice to see. Even if we're always not sure where it's gonna go, it helps us to strengthen our unity.
Okay, thank you for sharing all of that. We're going to wrap this up pretty soon here, but I had two more questions. The first question is, how can Christians outside of Quebec, whether that is, in Canada or in the United States or elsewhere, how can Christians outside of Quebec better understand and or support the challenges that you face in your province?
There's a book and a video series that I can give you the links to. It's called the Quebec Code. And it deciphers how the Quebec culture is different from the rest of Canada to help to understand them better and how to engage with them and how to do business, how to do evangelism, how to plant churches. I have many church planters that came from the States thinking it's going to be a 5-year thing, planting a church, and 20 years later, they're still there. And so it's different culture. So getting to know through those books and resources, I think that's the first step.
I'll answer the support part, and I'll be really clear. We need more help for the missionaries, for the evangelists. Like Jean-Sébastien Morin is doing a wonderful job with the whys of the faith. We do both ourselves our TV shows, but we need money to keep going with these shows. And I'll be really clear. We need missionaries. We need help. This morning, I was speaking with the Montreal Alouette chaplain, and he told me about all the high sport leagues in Quebec that players are asking for a chaplain, but there's no one just to say, yeah, I'll be your chaplain. There's no missionary that is available or no pastor to be there. So there's an urgent need for missionaries, for apologetics, for even pastors that want to come in Quebec, because people are asking questions and they want answers, and I think we need help at some point.
Yeah, and one of the things that I remember you two saying, and you two said the exact same thing at different times on different occasions, that what we need is not so much even materials that's in English, whether in Canada or the United States, being translated into French and brought to you. What you need is not even French material that is coming into Quebec, but what you need is Christian apologetics material that is by the Quebecois, for the Quebecois, because your culture is so unique and different. Is that right?
One of the example I give to make understand our reality is, imagine the only material you had what was in Spanish, and it was overdubbed in English. How long would you listen to the show?
Right.
And so the reality is, for most of the material that we have is dubbed over sometimes, or even the French books from France are as different enough so that the Quebecois people will not find themselves at home reading those stuff. So we need something that is made in Quebec, or with people with a love in Quebec that's going to come and share with the fun of reaching the Quebecois with us.
Okay, great. Now, my final question, and we'll wrap up here. If people want to learn more about you and your respective ministries, where would you send them?
For myself, it's easy. Samparle, SAMPARLE.org, O-R-G. You have in the first page all the videos, everything we do. Or if you want to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Samparle, you can learn French, Quebecois French, and you can see how we try to reach our nation for Christ in a strategic and creative way.
And on my side, I have a website called lafoi.ca, don't the faith.ca, but lafoi, LAFOI.ca. And thank you for having us, Steve, today.
Hey, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the AC podcast. It was great meeting you in person, and I certainly hope that that's going to happen again in the near future. I know you two are both very busy people, and so thank you so much for taking a time out of your day to join us and to speak to our listeners and viewers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve. We're glad of being part of AC.
Well, thank you so much, listeners, for joining us on this very special episode of the AC Podcast. Hopefully, this was a good chance for you to get to know that somewhat mysterious part of North America a little better. And hopefully, this also challenged you a little bit. And who knows, maybe you will be one of those missionaries who will go to Quebec and reach the Quebecois who really need Jesus, as we all do. So I hope you enjoyed it. We'll come back next week with more stuff to think about. Until then, you know the drill. Love God and love people. Bye for now.